We are going to talk about in this lesson something that's very common. It's called Git, G-I-T, and it is for version control. And the key to good version control, though, is that you have a version and branching strategy. If all you're doing is using version control to effectively save backups of your files, of your source code, that's not a bad thing. It's good to have those. It's good to be able to return to a point in time. However, once you have anything beyond one developer working on your code, then things like, and once you deploy your code, it's very valuable to have a way to get to that version that you deployed, because usually things will carry on and you'll do maintenance and things like that. And then also how to branch, which is even more important, because if you've got more than one developer, how do you, which is basically what branching solves, how do you have multiple developers working in different areas of the application and not have them step on each other's toes while they're doing the coding? That is where your branching strategy is going to come in. Now, with your versioning and your branching, the key is to be intentional. This is something that, again, if it's just one developer in their own little repository, it doesn't matter. But once you get 2, 3, 10 developers more, it is crucial that you have a strategy and that is documented so that people can know what that strategy is. And actually, you also need to have buy-in from your developers. However that is, it doesn't mean they have to be part of the design of it, but when you push that forward, when you document it and say, this is our programming standard, this is how we do version control, there should be something that is holding keep people accountable so that they do that, so that they follow those processes. Now, the goal with our versioning and our branching really is to easily merge and reproduce a path of changes. So those are two things. We want to be able to easily merge changes, but we also want to be able to, if we need to, go back and reproduce how did we get to a certain point in time of a release, or a maybe not a released version, but maybe a tag or a label or something like that, that is a milestone of some sort. And now I mentioned just now, you have tags also that are available. What you can do is you can use a tag to essentially be like a bookmark for a place in time or a milestone or key features. It is not uncommon for tagging strategy to be part of branching and versioning, so that when you create a version, instead of it being some UUID or not very human-friendly name, it has a tag that's something like version 1.0 beta, version 1.0 beta release 2, something like that, so that when somebody's looking at the tags, they can fairly quickly map that back to whatever that release is or milestone was that they wanted. A good example would be sprints. You may, if you're using Agile approach and you're essentially deploying or close enough to it deploying at each sprint, then maybe each tag is going to be, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3. And it may be more, have a little more information to it to that, but you may not need it. Sometimes people are going to use dates, things like that, but some way to point back and say, if I'm looking at all of the code changes and commits, where do I go to reproduce this thing that we had at this time? Now, branching typically is going to be based on some sort of a release. And really, and people can change this up, but it's, by that I mean, is by release a stable version of code. So when you've got, version 1.0, so you've got code that works, that means that you're comfortable with it. It's gone through its tests. It's been, blessed by QA or whoever it is. So you have at that point something that, quote, works. That is a great basis for a branch, because then what happens is you've got these branches that are based on usually adding functionality. So you have release 1.0, and let's say you have a branch that is adding security, and you have another branch that is adding back-end integration. Those two things are separate enough, but they need to have that stable foundation to work with. And now you're going to come back later, once the work is done on those, and merge those things back in. Typically what's going to happen is you will branch, and then you will merge. And if you think of it from a tree branch, is that you've got your main, I say trunk, and you have a branch that comes off of that. And then you have another branch that comes off of that, and we'll call that branch 2. And then you have another branch that comes off of branch 2, that's branch 3. Well, when you merge, what you want to do is you want to basically push the code from branch 3 all the way out on that little thing into branch 2, and then into branch 1, and then back into the trunk, so that you basically merge your way back into where the branches came from. It's sort of like, how do you find your way back home? If you go out and you start going in a direction and you turn left, and then you turn right, and you turn left or right or whatever, every time you make a decision, then in order to get back, you have to come back to those decision points to walk your way back to your home. It may seem a little bit confusing, but basically what you do is you branch and you say, okay, I'm on a stable section of code. I'm branching off of that. I'm going to do stuff based on that stable section. And then I'm going to come back when I'm done, and I'm going to merge back into that stable, because it should be, if I do it right, my stable changes with that stable foundation equals stable foundation with the new feature. Now, that can be a challenge, because if I'm working on something that's stable for me, and another developer is working on something and it's stable for them, but our things have some sort of conflict, then when we merge, there's going to be a conflict with the merge. But that's okay in a sense. I mean, yes, it's going to require work, but what it does is it means that we know where the conflicts are. We know that we both had this foundation that worked, and so we can actually track our changes and figure out where do we make our changes. And then really, if we need to, can almost line by line walk through those to figure out how to merge those things back. And then once you merge and you have those things now back into a solid working foundation branch, or actually not even branch, like trunk or main branch, if you want to call it that, or release branch, then you can tag it. And now I talk about release branches, is sometimes what happens is you have something that would be production. And then off of that, you're going to branch, you say, okay, we're going to go do some development. Well, at some point that development, maybe that's going to have a branch, and you're going to, or a tag or something along those lines, where it's like, okay, we're going to release this to QA, but then we're going to specifically be changing those things in the QA branch as opposed to our development branch. And then we'll eventually merge those. And then we want to merge to production. We'll have to merge our way back down to production. So it's not the easiest thing to see sometimes, but if you just think about it, as the branches are going to get bigger and bigger and wider, and there'll be more branches. But as you merge, then you're essentially in a way traveling back down those branches to get yourself down to that single master or trunk. Now, branching, I've talked about a couple different ways to do it, but I want to talk about the one way that I've found that is very common is it is a branch per ticket or per bug. So if there's a feature, if there's a bug that needs to be fixed, and you create a branch, you know what the branch is, the developer working on it does their changes, and then they merge it back. So what you do, and this is for your pros, is that when you handle this approach, the changes tend to be small. There's not a lot of changes usually that are made, which means that when you merge it back, merging is going to be more likely to be successful and less of a headache. Now, once you do that, it's the con, is that now every time you get a bug or a ticket or a task, you've got to split it off. You got to create your branch. You got to make sure the developers knows what branch they're on, and then there's got to be a merge back, and then eventually merge that back. And you can end up having a lot of branches. But you can merge and prune. So you can go to a point where you say, hey, once we get to this point, once we get to this bug being fixed, when we're going to merge it back, we know we're not going to need that branch anymore. So we're going to merge back, and then that branch disappears. And so in this case, you maybe have a lot of branches, but they end up disappearing because you're cleaning them up as you go. And now with the same thing, You may want to do that and have branches so that you can go into, version 2.0 or 3.0, so that you would go, release version 2.0. But if there were bugs to be fixed that were in 1.0, you could always work off of that branch and then have a 1.1 release even after 2.0 was even released, maybe even way after it was released. But if you do this per ticket bug, it tends to keep it essentially pretty close to the branch that you're working on. Assuming it's like a version branch or development versus maybe staging or production. The nice thing about this is it's going to be very focused. And so it's easy to just, pop out, do a branch, make your fix, test it specifically a lot of times, and then the merge you can test very specifically because you're not having to, you didn't touch a lot of stuff. The tests that you used on the merging or, as you branched and fixed it, those tests should effectively be able to be added to your overall testing strategy, verify it, and move on. So there's quite a few pros to taking this approach. The cons are really usually more about people just not being as comfortable creating branches and merging and things like that. And it's really more of a technical skill type of issue than it is the actual, the utility of taking this approach. However you do this goes back to, documentation and buying in. You need to ensure that the team agrees and adheres to your approach. Because if they don't, if you got developers that start doing their own thing, it can get out of hand and really tough to maintain quickly. I recommend that you make your committing and branching and versioning, tagging, all of that stuff is part of your code review and retrospectives if you're using using Scrum or Agile or something like that. Because those are going to be the kinds of things that you want to catch, just like you would want to catch a misspelling of retrosepticatives or whatever that happens to be. But if you make sure that you have everybody, check that out, that means check that as in review, where is the branch? What happened to the branch? How did it get merged? Where is it merged? Did we tag it? Things like that. Those should be part of your code review. Then that's going to ensure that the team feels like they are accountable to using the process properly. So the bottom line is, it may seem like your branching and tagging and merging strategy is just part of the tool. But if you really want to get the power of Git or any, especially distributed version control system like Git or Mercury or some of those other things out there, then utilizing these features are where you're going to find that these tools really work for you and really can save your butt in a pinch if some issue comes up, some bug comes up, or also just to avoid bugs reappearing and code getting lost because people just don't follow the processes. All that being said, it is more than worth it to invest a little time, make sure that you have a good strategy and that you communicate it and everybody buys in. Hope this helps you out. Thank you a lot for your time.
Well, hello, this is Rob with Developreneur, also known as Building Better Developers. Wanted to announce that we have school.developreneur.com. Feel free to check it out if you like any of this information, any of the content that we've sent, and you would like to see more. You can come out, you can enroll for free. We have free courses. We've got places for you to get better at just learning a technology, our how-tos. You can work on your business skills. We can help you with becoming a better developer, as in coding and things like that. A lot of the stuff you've seen on YouTube, we also have out at school.developreneur. We just have it in a little more of a educational format and a way for you to track your progress as you move forward becoming a better developer.